Grant Holloway was 38 years old, and until the morning everything changed, he believed he had a good marriage. Not perfect, not effortless, but real. Grant managed facilities operations for a large logistics company. He worked overtime without complaint, handled emergencies before most people knew there was a problem, and believed that taking care of people was part of doing any job well. He carried that belief into his marriage too. He loved without keeping score. He covered bills without turning them into speeches, made sacrifices without reminding his wife what they cost, and he had just secured a home equity line large enough to fully fund his wife Celeste's dream business. Celeste wanted to launch an event planning company. Grant had watched her build toward it for years. I had watched business plans spread across the dining room table. I had watched her revise budgets, research vendors, study branding, and talk about the kind of clients she hoped to attract. Grant worked extra hours and quietly moved money around because he wanted her to have a real chance. I believed he was building something with her. That belief shaped the way Grant made decisions. When an unexpected dental bill came up, he paid it without turning the expense into a reminder. When Celeste stayed late at the dining room table revising her business plan again, Grant made sure there was coffee and let her work. When overtime became available, he took it because he could see a direct line between those extra hours and the future she kept describing. He never thought of those things as sacrifices that needed to be recorded. They were simply what people did when they had chosen each other. Grant had watched Celeste revise the business plan again and again. He listened as she talked about websites, vendors, branding, client presentations, and the first events she hoped would make the company feel real. He understood that the launch mattered to her because it represented independence, ambition, and the chance to build something that carried her name. That was why the equity line mattered so much to him. He did not see it as money he was lending her. I saw it as both of them taking a step toward the same future. Then Celeste ended up in the hospital after a sudden medical emergency. Grant went to visit carrying her favorite flowers, birds of paradise, wrapped in brown paper. Honey had news for her. The home equity line had been approved. Enough money was available to cover the website, branding, launch expenses, and the early events she wanted to book. Grant had rehearsed how he would tell her, not because he needed the words to sound impressive. He wanted her to understand that he had done it deliberately, that he believed in her, that he wanted this for her. He reached the hospital room and found the door slightly open. The hospital had settled into that strange quiet that comes between waves of activity. Nurses moved with purpose, but without urgency. Machines hummed behind closed doors. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and recycled air. Grant recognized one of the nurses who had been there when Celeste was first admitted. She smiled when she saw him. Grant returned the smile and kept walking. The flowers were in one hand. His jacket sat neatly across his shoulders. Somewhere inside him was the quiet anticipation of a man carrying good news to someone he loved. He had imagined how Celeste might react when he told her the financing was approved. She was not someone who cried easily, but Grant had pictured her eyes softening. Maybe she would reach for his hand. Maybe she would say they had finally done it. That picture stayed with him right up until he reached the door. Voices carried into the hallway. Grant recognized Marissa Lane, Celeste's closest friend from college. He lifted one hand to knock. Then he heard his wife's voice. He stopped. Celeste was speaking in a tone Grant had never heard before. Loose, unguarded, almost bored. She said she loved Grant the way someone loved a cousin. Familiar, harmless, comforting because he had always been there, but not someone she was truly choosing anymore. Grant's hand stayed in the air. I did not knock. Then Celeste said she should have left years ago. She had almost done it before, but her business was not ready. She was not financially ready. Timing, she said, mattered. Grant slowly lowered his hand. The flowers remained at his side. Marissa said Grant was a good man. Celeste agreed without hesitation. Absolutely a good man. Then she laughed and called him the best investment she had ever made. Grant stood completely still. It was not only the words that disturbed him. It was the ease. Celeste was not crying. She was not confused. She was not speaking like someone caught between two difficult emotions. She sounded like someone explaining a plan that had already been completed in her mind. That mattered to Grant. Facilities work had taught him that there was a difference between an emergency and a system failure. An emergency happened suddenly. A system failure developed through overlooked decisions, repeated weaknesses, and problems that had been allowed to grow. What Grant was hearing did not sound sudden. It sounded designed. Marissa's role bothered him too. She did not sound shocked enough. She asked questions, but they were the questions of someone catching up on details, not someone discovering a betrayal for the first time. Grant did not know how much Marissa already knew. He only knew that Celeste felt safe enough to speak freely in front of her. Then Celeste said the equity line was almost finalized. Once her business launched and she had a solid record of income, she planned to leave. Cleanly. She had already thought through most of the process. Marissa sounded surprised by how thoroughly Celeste had planned it. Celeste said she had been thinking about it for years. Then another name entered the conversation. Preston Vale. Grant felt his jaw tighten. Celeste spoke Preston's name differently, soft around the edges, careful in a way that meant something. She said they had recently met for lunch. Preston had driven in from Charlotte. She said it felt like no time had passed between them, like he understood her in a way Grant did not. Marissa warned her that Grant was still her husband, that he worked constantly for her, that he had been loyal. Celeste dismissed the concern. Good men are everywhere, she said. What she needed from Grant now was his credit score and his silence. That was all. When the time came, she would leave cleanly. Grant would be fine. Men like Grant always landed on their feet. Grant stood with his back against the hallway wall. His breathing remained even. His hands were still. I expected some physical reaction. Shaking, sweating, something that matched the size of what he was hearing. Nothing came. The flowers were simply flowers. Orange and purple petals wrapped carefully in brown paper. He held them like they weighed nothing. Then Grant turned and walked away from the room. Not fast, not slow. The same steady pace he used when he arrived. He passed the nurse's station, a family waiting area, a television playing behind another door. Then he sat near the elevators and placed the flowers on the chair beside him. He rested both hands on his knees. He stayed there for a while, long enough for something inside him to shift. He could not yet name it, but he understood that certain things were different now. Grant took out his phone and sent a message to Isaiah Brooks. I did not call. He did not want to hear another person's reaction yet. A text was cleaner, short, controlled. He opened Isaiah's name and typed exactly what he needed. I need to see you. Your office. Then he read the sentence once before sending it. Grant had known Isaiah long enough to trust two things about him. Isaiah did not panic, and he did not flatter people when they needed clear information. If Grant was standing at the beginning of something larger than betrayal, Isaiah was the person he wanted beside him when he started separating emotion from legal reality. Grant pressed send. The message left the screen. He'd put the phone back in his pocket. The flowers remained beside him. He could have thrown them away. For a brief moment, that might even have felt appropriate. Instead, Grant looked at the brown paper, the bright petals, and the careful arrangement he had driven out of his way to buy. The flowers had not lied to him. They were still what he intended them to be when he bought them. A gift. That mattered. Grant stood. I need to see you. Your office. Isaiah was an attorney Grant had trusted for years. Grant put the phone away. Then he stood, picked up the flowers, and walked back towards Celeste's room. This time he knocked. Celeste called for him to come in. Grant opened the door and smiled. Hey, how are you feeling? I held out the flowers. And for the rest of the visit, Grant became exactly what Celeste expected him to be. Warm, attentive, reliable. He refilled her water without being asked. He listened. I laughed when he was supposed to laugh. When she reached for his hand, he gave it to her. A nurse found a plastic pitcher for the flowers. The birds of paradise looked almost too bright against the white hospital walls. Grant never looked at them again. Marissa left before Grant did. She hugged Celeste carefully, then turned toward Grant with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She needs her rest, Marissa said. Like advice, maybe like a warning. She'll get it, Grant replied. I'll make sure. Grant brought Celeste home when she was discharged. He helped her into the car. He arranged pillows at the house, He placed medication on the nightstand, set water within reach, left crackers nearby because her appetite was still weak. Celeste touched his arm in the car and said she did not know what she would do without him. Grant kept his eyes on the road. "You'd figure it out," he said. He smiled slightly. Celeste heard warmth in it. Grant heard something else. Later, Grant drove to Isaiah's office. Isaiah had already cleared the chairs in front of his desk. No clutter. No unnecessary interruption. Grant sat down and explained everything. Methodically. That was how he had always dealt with situations that could become complicated. At work, when a mechanical system failed, Grant did not begin by guessing at the most dramatic explanation. He started with what was known. What changed? What happened immediately before the failure? What records existed? What could be measured? He approached his marriage the same way now. Grant did not tell Isaiah that Celeste was evil. He did not say she had never loved him. He did not say Preston had destroyed his marriage. Those were conclusions, and conclusions could wait. Instead, Grant described what he heard, where he stood, who was in the room, the exact phrases he remembered, the financing Celeste mentioned, the name Preston Vale, the reference to a future exit, the language about Grant's credit score, and silence. Isaiah listened to facts. That was what Grant wanted. Methodically. I told Isaiah about the flowers, the open hospital door, where he stood. Exactly what Celeste said. Heroine. The pauses. The laugh. Isaiah listened without interrupting. He did not start writing until Grant finished. Then he asked one question. How recent was the lunch with Preston Vale? Celeste said it was recent. Isaiah wrote something down. Then he set his pen flat on the legal pad. There's something you need to know, he said. Grant looked at him. Isaiah said he had been debating whether it was his place to say anything. Months earlier, Celeste had contacted a family law attorney. Not Isaiah. A colleague at another firm. The consultation itself was confidential. But Isaiah had learned that Celeste was exploring her options. Grant held Isaiah's gaze. She's been planning this, Isaiah answered plainly. This isn't a feeling that got out of hand. It's a project. Grant was quiet. How long? Based on what you heard, Isaiah said. At least a couple of years. Maybe longer. Grant nodded once. The phrase stayed with him. It's a project. That explained why the hospital conversation had sounded so calm. Celeste had not been confessing a sudden attraction or describing a marriage she had only recently decided to leave. She had been talking through a sequence. Business first, income history next, then departure. Grant realized that if he reacted emotionally now, he would be stepping into a plan Celeste had already spent far more time thinking about than he had. She had preparation. He needed information. She had a narrative. He needed documents. She had been working ahead of him without his knowledge. The only way Grant could protect himself was to stop trying to catch up emotionally and start building his own clear picture from the ground up. I need the whole picture before I do anything. Financially. Legally. I want to know exactly what I'm looking at. Then we start with documentation, Isaiah said. Joint accounts, individual accounts, business expenses, the home equity application, anything you paid toward her business, receipts, transfers, a timeline. Grant opened his phone and began making a list. That evening he made dinner for Celeste. Chicken soup, her choice, his work. They ate at the kitchen table. She was still moving carefully after surgery. Grant asked if she needed anything before bed. Celeste said no. She kissed him on the cheek, said good night. Grant waited until the light under the bedroom door disappeared. Then he sat alone at the kitchen table. I did not turn on the light. He pulled a legal pad toward him, clicked his pen, and started writing. The next morning looked ordinary. Coffee, eggs, toast, orange juice, medication. Celeste entered the kitchen slowly. Grant already had a plate waiting at her usual place. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know. Grant placed a fork beside the plate. How's the pain? Better. Take the medication with food. Yes, doctor, Celeste said, smiling. Grant smiled back. I was very good at it. Celeste rested a lot while she recovered. Grant worked from home whenever possible and went into the facility when he had to. Between meals, errands, medication, and ordinary household tasks, he sat in the spare bedroom with his laptop and started reviewing accounts. Joint checking came first. Grant opened the bank portal and looked at the familiar numbers with unfamiliar attention. For years, he had treated the account as a shared tool rather than a battlefield. His salary went in. Household expenses came out. Celeste used it. Grant used it. There had never been a reason to imagine that ordinary transactions needed investigation. Now every line meant something different. Grant created a simple system. Expected household spending went into one category. Transfers or withdrawals he could not immediately explain went into another. He did not call Celeste into the room to ask about anything. That would defeat the purpose. If an expense had an innocent explanation, the documentation would eventually show it. If it did not, then asking early would only create an opportunity for a story to be built around it. Grant trusted records more than explanations now. He worked slowly. The longer he looked, the more he realized how easy it had been for small transactions to disappear inside an ordinary marriage. A few $100s did not feel dramatic when two people had salaries, bills, groceries, utilities, repairs, and business expenses moving through the same account. But repetition changed the meaning. Grant had years of statements available online. He began at the oldest one he could access. Then he went forward, line by line. I was looking for a pattern. Once he knew there might be one, it did not take long to find. Transfers, small at first, a few $100s, then another, all moved into an account Grant recognized as Celeste's private savings. She had owned the account before the marriage. Sometimes she referred to it as money for personal expenses. Grant had never questioned it. Why would he? The amounts increased over time. That progression was what caught Grant's attention. Early transfers were easy to ignore. A few $100s could have meant anything. A purchase, a personal bill, an expense Celeste intended to explain and forgot. But then another transfer appeared, then another. The pattern grew stronger. Grant compared the dates against what he remembered from those periods in their marriage. There had been no conversations about moving shared money into Celeste's private savings. No agreement that she needed to build a separate reserve. No discussion about protecting funds for the business. The silence around the transfers mattered as much as the amounts. Grant realized that while he had been working overtime to increase what they could build together, Celeste had been moving part of that shared money somewhere he could not see. That did not tell him exactly what she intended, but it told him the financial secrecy was not new. The transfers became more frequent. Grant calculated the total. He checked the arithmetic again because the number looked too large when it sat by itself. Then he checked it a third time. The answer did not change. Grant thought about where that money came from. Not abstractly. He remembered overtime shifts, calls that interrupted dinner, weekends spent inside a logistics facility while other people were home. He remembered telling Celeste more than once that the extra work was worth it because they were trying to get ahead. I had believed the account balance represented shared effort. Now part of that effort had been quietly redirected. Grant did not allow himself to decide what every dollar had been used for. The evidence did not show that yet, but it did show one thing clearly. Celeste had been creating financial separation inside a marriage Grant still believed was financially transparent. Just under $19,000 had moved from their joint account into Celeste's private account without a single conversation. He wrote the figure down, small handwriting, even spacing. Then came the cash withdrawals. Grant cross-referenced them against his work records. I had logged overtime shifts for years. The alignment was obvious. On weekends when Grant was working emergency operations, cash came out of an automated teller machine several miles from the house. Similar amounts, often from the same location. Grant photographed every statement. Clean angles, clear numbers, no assumptions, only records. Then he reviewed Celeste's business expenses. For years, Grant had been depositing money into an account she used for the event planning business she wanted to launch. Seed money, she called it. Working capital, licensing, membership fees, vendor relationships. He pulled every receipt she had ever shared with him. Some matched her explanations. Enough did not. Grant built a separate column for discrepancies. He refused to guess and only recorded what he could verify. Assumptions were useless. Documented facts were not. Then Grant researched Preston Vale. Grant approached the search carefully. I was not looking for gossip. He did not search for accusations or try to find reasons to hate a man he had never met. He wanted to understand who Preston was, what kind of work he did, and what mattered to him professionally. The public profile answered most of that. Preston had built a business around perception. His website was restrained and polished. His professional photograph was deliberate without looking theatrical. The language on the site emphasized trust, strategy, communication, and relationships. Grant noticed the irony, but did not dwell on it. He clicked through the client section, then the testimonials, then a regional business profile. The article described Preston as a connector, someone whose value came partly from knowing the right people and keeping those relationships active. Grant read that description more than once. In facilities management, Grant's value existed even when nobody liked him. A ventilation system either worked or it did not. A maintenance schedule either prevented failure or it did not. Preston's business was different. Trust itself was part of the product. The first thing he found was a polished professional profile. Preston ran a small marketing consultancy in the city. Brand strategy, executive positioning, corporate communications, a carefully maintained image, a modest list of clients. The business appeared legitimate, but it was also dependent almost entirely on relationships. Introductions, reputation, trust. There was no major inventory, no product line, no large infrastructure. The business existed because people believed Preston was someone worth doing business with. Grant noted that. He did not decide what it meant yet. He simply recorded the fact. Later, he called Isaiah. I pulled the public information on Preston Vale, Grant said. Small consultancy, relationship-driven, limited number of clients. Isaiah made a thoughtful sound. Interesting timing. Then he mentioned that an old fraternity brother of his, Malcolm Reed, worked as a corporate communications director at a regional company. Preston's firm had recently reached out about a possible contract. The discussions were still early. Grant looked through the windshield of his parked car. Is that right? That's right, Isaiah replied. Neither man said anything else. That evening, Grant organized his documents into a manila folder. He placed the folder inside his work bag. Then he walked to the bedroom doorway. Celeste was asleep on her side, one hand beneath the pillow, hair loose. In the dim light, she looked like the woman Grant had fallen in love with years earlier. He stood there for a long moment. Then he pulled the door almost closed. I went back to the spare room. There was more work to do. Grant's next call was to Marissa. This part required a different kind of control. Grant knew Marissa had been in the hospital room. I knew she heard Celeste describe the plan. What he did not know was whether Marissa had actively helped with any of it, whether she simply kept quiet, or whether she had only recently learned how serious Celeste had become. Grant did not want to accuse her. Not yet. He wanted to see what happened when Marissa believed he knew nothing. So he chose a reason to meet that would make sense. A small gathering for Celeste. Something thoughtful. Something the Grant everyone knew would naturally do. I understood that if Marissa believed the old version of events was still intact, she might reveal more through what she avoided than through anything she actually said. Grant called. He kept his voice easy, warm, the voice of a husband planning something kind. He told Marissa he wanted to organize a small gathering for Celeste once she felt stronger. Nothing exhausting, just a few people. He said he wanted Marissa's help. You're her person, Grant said. Marissa hesitated, then agreed. They met for coffee at a busy neighborhood place where privacy and public space existed at the same time. Grant arrived first. Marissa looked tired when she came in. Not exactly exhausted, more like someone who had been carrying something uncomfortable for too long. Grant stood and smiled. Thanks for coming. Of course. They sat. Grant asked about Celeste, how she seemed emotionally, whether she had been stressed, whether the business had been weighing on her before the surgery. Marissa's answers were cautious. Business stuff. Launch timeline. Normal pressure. Grant nodded thoughtfully. I did not push. He changed the conversation. Guest list. Food. Whether Celeste would prefer afternoon or evening. As the conversation continued, Marissa relaxed. Grant watched the change without making it obvious. At first, Marissa held the coffee cup tightly. She answered questions about Celeste's stress with careful phrases. Business pressure. Recovery. Normal worries. Nothing specific. Grant gave her every chance to believe that answer satisfied him. Then he shifted to harmless details. Who should be invited? Whether Celeste would want music? What kind of food would be easiest while she was still recovering? The change worked. Marissa's body loosened. She began speaking more naturally. The careful pauses became shorter. The effort behind her answers faded. Grant understood then that Marissa had entered the meeting prepared for a difficult question and believed she had successfully avoided it. That was useful information, not proof of wrongdoing, but information. Her shoulders lowered. Her hands loosened around the cup. She believed she had gotten through the difficult part. Grant allowed that. When they walked outside, he held the door for her. Then he stopped. Marissa. She turned. Grant looked directly at her. I need you to know that I'm not the man Celeste told you I was. Marissa's face changed slightly. A tightening around the mouth. A small movement near the eyes. Enough. When this is over, Grant continued, I hope you remember that. I gave one calm nod and walked to his car. I knew Marissa would call Celeste. She did. Grant expected it. That night, after Celeste went to bed, Grant opened the family calendar they had shared for years. Work schedules, maintenance appointments, travel, ordinary household records. I went backward through months of entries. Then he compared the calendar against the cash withdrawals. The alignment was precise. Weekend trips Celeste labeled as time with friends matched withdrawals. A vendor meeting in Charlotte matched another cluster. A spa trip matched more. Grant stopped at one Charlotte entry. Then he began calling the hotel associated with the location. It took patience. He explained that he was verifying an expense for tax documentation connected to his wife. Eventually, the rights department confirmed the reservation. The room had been booked under Celeste Holloway and Preston Vale. 2 guests, 1 room. Grant wrote down the representative's name, the hotel, and the reservation information. He checked the spelling twice. He noted exactly what had been confirmed. I did not write affair beside it. I did not write betrayal. The hotel record did not prove emotion. It proved that Celeste and Preston had been registered together for a stay that Celeste had represented to Grant differently. That distinction mattered to him. Grant had become almost stubborn about keeping every piece of evidence inside the boundaries of what it actually showed. The bank statements proved money moved. The calendar proved what Celeste claimed to be doing on certain dates. The hotel confirmed that she and Preston were together during one of those periods. The hospital conversation supplied intent. Each piece supported another. The structure was beginning to hold its own weight. Grant slid the page into the folder. Then he placed the page in the folder behind the bank records. He stood at the kitchen sink afterward and drank cold water while looking into the dark backyard. The facts were becoming clearer. The pain was becoming quieter. The next time Grant met Isaiah, he placed the thick manila folder on the desk. Everything? Isaiah asked. Everything I have. Isaiah opened it. Bank records, transfers, cash withdrawals, business discrepancies, hotel confirmation, the home equity approval, the timeline. He read carefully. Grant waited. When Isaiah finally closed the folder, he leaned back. She built this on a foundation that doesn't exist, he said. Grant stayed quiet. Isaiah explained. This was the first moment Grant began to understand how different Celeste's imagined future was from the legal reality. For years, she had talked about the business as though it already existed in substance. There were plans, vendor lists, brand concepts, possible clients, early expenses. To Grant, those things had felt real because they represented effort and intention. To the law, Isaiah explained, intention was not the same as established value. A company without operating history, clients, receivables, inventory, or meaningful assets was not a hidden fortune waiting to be divided. Celeste had been planning around a future business she believed Grant's home equity would create. Without that borrowed money, much of the financial structure she expected to stand on disappeared. Grant listened carefully. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt clarity. Celeste's business had not truly launched. No established operating history. No significant client base. No meaningful business assets. No accounts receivable. No inventory. There was very little actual business value to divide, because what Celeste was counting on mostly existed as a future idea. The home equity line was different. It had been approved, but Grant had not drawn from it. No money had been taken. That meant Grant could withdraw the application and refuse to take on the debt. Celeste could not force him to create new debt against the house simply because she had planned around it. Grant nodded. Then Isaiah turned to the account transfers. I described them as potential dissipation of marital assets. Money moved away from the marriage for personal purposes without Grant's knowledge. A judge would care about that. It could affect equitable distribution. Then Isaiah reached the house. He paused. Grant had inherited the home before marrying Celeste. It had remained in his name. No refinancing placed her on title. No commingling changed its character. Isaiah looked directly at him. She cannot take the house. Grant absorbed that. The house had been left to him by family. I had painted it room by room before Celeste moved in. I had worked alone on weekends, restoring walls, repairing trim, fixing whatever needed fixing. Celeste had been planning a future that assumed the house would become part of the exit. It would not. I want to wait before you file, Grant said. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. One more piece, Grant added. I'll know it when I have it. Isaiah nodded. That was enough. Grant told Isaiah what he had learned about Preston's consultancy, the narrow client list, the dependence on reputation, the potential contract with Isaiah's old fraternity brother. Isaiah listened. Then he said he had been meaning to catch up with Malcolm anyway. We're overdue. He picked up his coffee. I won't say anything that isn't true. Grant met his eyes. I know you won't. Grant went home. Celeste sat in the living room with her laptop, working on what she called light planning. Grant kissed the top of her head, asked if she needed anything. Then he changed clothes. Later, they ate pasta together. The conversation was normal. Celeste asked about his day. Grant asked about hers. Toward the end of the meal, Celeste casually mentioned the business launch. She said the coming season would be ideal. If the equity paperwork moved forward soon, she could begin booking more seriously. Grant set down his fork. I need a little more time with it. Celeste smiled. Warm. Patient. The smile of someone who believed the delay could be managed. Of course, she said. There's no rush. Grant nodded. Then another piece arrived from an unexpected direction. Grant had not asked Celeste's family to investigate her. I had not contacted her mother. He had not tried to recruit siblings into the divorce that had not yet been filed. He wanted to keep the conflict contained until he had no choice. That was why Tessa's call mattered. She came to him. The sound of her voice told Grant immediately that whatever she wanted to say had cost her something. Tessa loved her sister. Grant knew that. Family loyalty had never been theoretical in Celeste's family. They gathered. They called. They remembered birthdays. They showed up when someone was sick. For Tessa to ask Grant for a private meeting meant she had reached a point where silence felt worse than disclosure. Grant understood that before he knew any details. Celeste's younger sister, Tessa, called Grant. Her voice sounded controlled in a way that told him she had been fighting to keep it steady. She asked to meet somewhere neutral, not Grant's house, not their mother's house. Grant agreed. They met at an old diner. Vinyl booths, constant coffee, a place quiet enough for a serious conversation without feeling private. Tessa arrived with red eyes. She sat across from Grant and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Grant waited. She said she had been at their mother's house when Celeste visited. Celeste left behind a shared tablet with a message thread still open. Tessa insisted she had not been snooping. She picked up the tablet to change the music. Grant believed her. The thread was between Celeste and Preston. Tessa said she did not read everything. She could not, but she read enough. The relationship had been going on for a long time. The business was described as the last step. Once Celeste had her own money, she planned to leave Grant. She wrote about him like he was something she was finishing. A final requirement, a formality. Tessa said Preston spoke as though the future had already been decided, as though Celeste had already chosen him. Grant simply remained quiet. Then Tessa told him there was more. Celeste had already been talking to their mother and aunts. For months, she had been building a version of the marriage in which Grant was emotionally closed off. Distant, uninterested, the man who never made her feel like a priority. Celeste had been telling family she had been unhappy for years and was finally choosing herself. Grant thought about all the family gatherings. That part hurt in a different way. Money could be counted. Hotel records could be verified. But reputation inside a family was softer, harder to defend once a story settled. Grant remembered fixing things at Lorraine's house because they needed fixing. A faucet, furniture, small jobs no one had to ask him twice to handle. He remembered birthday calls from people who had become family through Celeste, holiday meals, conversations in kitchens, the casual trust that forms after years of being included. And now Grant understood that while those relationships continued normally on the surface, Celeste had been changing the story underneath them. She was giving people a framework through which they would later interpret the divorce. By the time Grant knew he needed to defend his own character, Celeste expected the family to have already accepted her explanation. The hugs, birthday calls, the way Celeste's mother treated him like part of the family. And suddenly, he understood what Celeste had been doing. She had not only been preparing a financial exit, she had been preparing an audience, managing the story before Grant knew there was a story to defend himself against. She's been managing it, Grant said. Tessa nodded. She's good at that. Grant looked at her. Whatever happens next, none of this is on you. Tessa's eyes filled. She's my sister. I didn't come here to destroy her life. I just couldn't sit there and know this. She stopped. You're a good man, Grant. You didn't deserve any of it. Grant looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, then settled. I know, he said. That's why I'm handling it. He walked Tessa to her car, waited until she drove away. Then he called Isaiah. We have everything, Grant said. Pull the equity line. The next morning, Grant contacted the lender. He told the loan officer his financial circumstances had changed and he no longer wanted to proceed with the home equity line. She offered to discuss alternatives. Grant politely declined and only wanted the application withdrawn. The lender processed the request. Grant received confirmation that the line would not move forward. I did not tell Celeste immediately. I went to work, came home, asked about her recovery, listened while she talked enthusiastically about vendor calls, color palettes, and potential clients. That part of Celeste was real. Her excitement about the business had always been genuine. Grant could see that without allowing it to erase everything else. I washed dishes, went to bed, slept easily. His decisions had been made. The confirmation letter eventually arrived at the house. Celeste called Grant while he was at work. Her voice sounded smooth, but the rhythm was wrong. She said a lender letter had arrived. The equity application had been withdrawn. That's right, Grant said. Celeste paused. What's going on? I thought we were finalizing it. Grant said he had reviewed their overall debt exposure and no longer felt comfortable borrowing against the house. Celeste said that was a conversation they should have had together. You're right, Grant replied. And we will. He said they would talk when he got home. Celeste was waiting at the kitchen table when Grant arrived. Dinner was already made. Her posture was controlled. Both hands rested around a glass of water. She had prepared herself. Walk me through it, she said. Grant sat across from her. He served himself food. Then he explained calmly that the equity line made sense when he first applied. But after reviewing their financial situation more closely, he no longer wanted to create that liability. Celeste's jaw moved slightly. The business depends on that funding. We've been planning around it. I know. Grant took a slow bite. There are some things I want us to discuss about where we are. Let's sit down properly soon, with clear heads. Celeste studied him. Something new appeared in her expression. Not fear, not quite suspicion, but the first sign that she no longer completely understood the man sitting across from her. Fine, she said. Grant agreed. The table became quiet. Not comfortable quiet. Tight quiet, like a wire pulled too far. Over the next several days, Celeste made calls. Grant knew she spoke to Marissa. He assumed she spoke to Preston. I did not need every word. He already had enough. Then Grant prepared the final conversation. I did not rehearse insults. He did not write down questions designed to corner Celeste emotionally. Unorganized documents. That was enough. He wanted the conversation to be impossible to redirect into vague complaints about the marriage. Celeste could say she had been unhappy. Grant would not argue with that. She could say he worked too much. I would not debate feelings. She could say the marriage had changed. That might even be true. But none of those things changed the bank transfers, the hotel record, the hidden planning, the home equity strategy, or the fact that Celeste had been managing a different story with her family. Grant wanted the evidence arranged in a sequence that required no shouting. I organized the evidence folder. Bank records first. Hotel confirmation. Written timeline. Account transfers. trips matched to calendar entries. The equity line withdrawal, everything in order. Grant cooked dinner, roasted chicken, rice, green beans with garlic and lemon. Simple food, the kind of meal that required care without announcing it. He set the table the way his grandmother had taught him. 2 full place settings, good plates, cloth napkins, water glasses. The documentation folder sat in the center of the table where a candle might normally sit. Celeste came downstairs dressed carefully, not formally, but intentionally. Hair done. A blouse Grant recognized. She was preparing to persuade him. Then she saw the folder. Her eyes moved from it to Grant. "Sit down," Grant said quietly. "Food's ready." Celeste sat. Grant served both plates. Then he sat across from her. He opened the folder and laid the first page in front of her. Bank records. Celeste's name appeared beside transfers into a private account Grant had never been given access to. Grant looked at her. "I was in the hallway outside your hospital room. You were talking to Marissa." Celeste looked up. Grant's voice stayed level. "I heard everything and let the words sit. I've known for a while. I waited because I needed the full picture before I said anything." Celeste opened her mouth. Grant lifted one hand. "Let me finish." Not loud. Final. Celeste closed her mouth. Grant repeated the parts that mattered. Best investment I ever made. His credit score and his silence. Then he opened the hotel confirmation. Celeste Holloway, Preston Vale. Same room. He placed one finger on the line. Then he moved to the next document. Grant told her he also knew about the story she had been building with her mother and aunts. Emotionally unavailable husband, unhappy wife, years of distance, a narrative laid down carefully in advance. Celeste denied it first. Grant watched the denial arrive almost automatically. For a second, he could see why it might have worked on him before. Celeste was intelligent. She was quick. She understood tune. She knew how to sound hurt without sounding defensive. How to question a detail in a way that made the entire accusation seem uncertain. But Grant had spent too long building the timeline. I did not need her to confess. That changed everything. I was not presenting a theory and asking Celeste whether it was true. I was presenting facts and informing her what he had decided. When Celeste challenged one point, Grant moved to the supporting record. When she shifted toward the state of the marriage, Grant allowed the subject to exist without letting it replace the financial and relational deception. There was nowhere productive for the denial to go. Smoothly, almost convincingly, Grant turned to another page. The denial stopped. Then Celeste changed tactics. Her chin lifted. Her voice became tired. Wounded. She said she had been unhappy. Grant nodded. "I know." He opened another part of the timeline. He reminded her of an anniversary trip he planned. Time away from work. Money he spent because he wanted her to feel celebrated. Then he pointed out a trip to Charlotte with Preston soon afterward. The dates were there. Celeste looked down. Grant placed both hands flat on the table. "There are 3 things you need to hear clearly. First, Isaiah Brooks represents me now. The divorce will be filed." Celeste went still. "Second, the house is separate property. I inherited it before we married. Your attorney can confirm that independently." He paused. "Third, the equity line is gone. I withdrew the application." The color in Celeste's face changed. For the first time, Grant saw real calculation become fear. Not fear of him, fear of the plan collapsing. "I'm asking you to move out," Grant said. "Isaiah will provide the formal notice." Celeste said nothing. For the first time since Grant had known her, she did not have a prepared response. Grant picked up his fork. The chicken was good. The rice had come out right. "Niate." Celeste eventually left the table. Grant heard her footsteps upstairs. Then a door closed. Not slammed, just closed. Grant remained alone in the kitchen. The silence felt different from the silence in the hospital hallway. There, Grant had been standing inside the moment when the life he understood suddenly split open. Here, the truth was no longer new. It had shape. Documents, names, decisions. Grant looked at the place where Celeste had been sitting. He felt grief. I did not deny that. Years of marriage do not become meaningless simply because part of them was built on deception. Grant remembered good days too. He remembered ordinary evenings that had felt honest when they happened. I was not interested in rewriting every memory as fake, simply to make leaving easier. Some parts might have been real, some might not. He would probably never know exactly where one ended and the other began. But he knew enough. He finished his meal, folded his napkin, carried both plates to the sink. I washed his own, then he washed hers. A few days later, Celeste called a family meeting. Grant learned about it through Tessa. She sent a short message. Celeste called everyone together at Mum's house. Grant replied that he would be there. He drove in silence. No music, no rehearsed speech. At the house, Celeste's mother, Lorraine, sat near the window. Two aunts, Jocelyn and Laurel, sat together on the couch. Tessa sat apart from them near the hallway. Celeste stood near the fireplace. She had dressed carefully again. She carried herself like someone who had rehearsed. Grant greeted Lorraine first. He shook her hand and held it briefly. Then he nodded to the aunts and sat near the door. He waited. Celeste began. Grant recognized the structure immediately. It was not a wild lie. That would have been easier to challenge. Instead, Celeste used emotionally plausible language. People do drift. Spouses do become distant. Marriages do change. Grant knew that. That was why the story could work. It did not require the family to believe Grant was cruel. Only unavailable, busy, closed off. A decent man who simply failed to give Celeste what she needed. That version protected Celeste from having to explain the planning, the money, Preston, or the fact that Grant had been preparing to borrow against his own inherited house to fund the business she intended to use as part of her exit. Grant listened. I did not interrupt. He wanted everyone in the room to hear Celeste's version exactly as she chose to tell it. Her voice was calm, warm, sad in exactly the right amount. She talked about incompatibility, different goals, years of trying, drift, distance, mutual change. She did not say Preston's name. She did not say anything specific enough to be easily disproved. Lorraine nodded slowly. Grant understood then how much of Celeste's story the family had already heard. He let her finish. Completely. When Celeste stopped talking, Lorraine looked toward Grant. Maybe she expected an argument, maybe an apology. Grant reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He opened an audio message that had become part of his documentation. He pressed play and set the phone on the coffee table. Celeste's voice filled the room. Laughing, talking to Preston, making plans. A hotel. The tone of a woman speaking to someone she had been thinking about for a long time. Nothing about the recording sounded like mutual drift. Nothing sounded accidental. The recording was brief. Low enough. Grant stopped it. For Grant, the point of the recording was not humiliation. I did not play it to punish Celeste in front of her family. He played it because the room had been asked to accept one story, while Grant possessed direct evidence of another. That distinction mattered to him. If Celeste had told the family simply that she wanted the marriage to end, Grant might have said very little. People were allowed to leave. They were allowed to be unhappy. They were even allowed to make selfish choices. What Grant could not accept was being assigned a false role in a story designed to protect the planning that happened behind his back. The recording prevented that. No speech from Grant could have carried the same weight as Celeste's own voice. The room became completely still. Jocelyn pressed one hand against her chest. Laurel stared at the carpet. Lorraine's expression remained controlled, but something behind it changed. The slow movement of a belief being revised. Tessa looked down. Grant looked directly at Lorraine. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I came because a lie was going to stand in this room, and I couldn't let that happen. Not here. Not with you. He paused. I love this family. That part was always real. I need you to know that too. Grant stood. I thanked Lorraine for welcoming him into her home all those years. Then he left without looking at Celeste. Outside, he called Isaiah. File it, Grant said. That was all. The days that followed unfolded without Grant needing to force anything. Isaiah eventually spoke with Malcolm Reed, his old fraternity brother who had been considering a contract with Preston's consultancy. Nothing was fabricated. No rumor. No invented accusation. Only the truth about the situation and the kind of choices Preston had made. Malcolm decided the relationship was too complicated. He passed on the contract. Other referrals slowed. That was how reputation moved in professional circles. Not loudly, efficiently. Preston eventually sent Grant a message suggesting they meet man to man. Grant read it once and ignored it for a while. Then he answered, "I understand exactly what this situation is. I don't meet with men who conduct themselves the way you do." Grant sent the message. Then he went to bed. Preston called Celeste. Grant did not know every detail of the conversation. Tessa later summarized it simply. It didn't go well. After that, Preston became distant, then unavailable, then gone. The relationship that had seemed so certain while Grant remained useful became much less certain once the financial plan stopped working. The divorce moved forward. Grant kept his involvement practical. When Isaiah needed a signature, Grant signed. When financial records needed clarification, Grant answered. He did not use the proceedings as a reason to keep talking to Celeste. He did not ask Tessa for updates about Preston. He did not call Marissa to demand an apology. The legal process had its own rhythm, and Grant let it work. He also began learning how much of his life had been organized around preventing discomfort for other people. At work, he solved problems early so employees could keep moving. At home, he covered expenses before they became arguments. When Celeste needed support, he gave it before she had to ask twice. There was nothing inherently wrong with that. But Grant finally saw how easily competence could become an invitation for others to stop noticing what it cost him. Celeste had once said men like Grant always landed on their feet. Grant understood the compliment hidden inside the insult. She believed his resilience made the damage acceptable. He would recover, therefore the betrayal could be managed. Grant rejected that logic. Strong people still deserved honesty. Reliable people still deserved consideration. A person being capable of surviving harm did not make causing that harm harmless. That mattered because for years he had been solving problems before other people noticed them. At work, that instinct was valuable. In the marriage, it had sometimes turned into carrying more than his share simply because he could. Now he was learning that not every consequence needed his management. Celeste had an attorney. Grant had Isaiah. The records existed. The court could do its job. Celeste received her personal belongings, her vehicle, and the share of joint funds she was legally entitled to at separation. The house stayed with Grant. It had always been separate property. There was no serious fight over that once Celeste's attorney reviewed the records. The missing and diverted marital funds were addressed through the financial process. The home equity debt never existed because Grant never drew from the line. Celeste eventually launched the event planning business anyway, but without the large amount of borrowed money she had expected. The launch was slower, harder, less comfortable than the version she had planned. Grant did not monitor it closely. I had no reason to. I took a short trip to Atlanta. He stayed in a hotel with blackout curtains and no alarm. Manny ate well, spent time with an old college roommate, laughed until his face hurt. Then he came home feeling rested in a way he had not felt in years. In the garage, woodworking tools sat beneath a tarp. Grant had not touched them for a long time. Celeste always disliked the sawdust, the noise, the inconvenience. Grant pulled the tarp away. Dust had settled over everything. The sight of the tools brought back a part of himself he had barely noticed disappearing. Woodworking had never been a career. It was not something Grant needed to monetize. That was probably why he loved it. Facilities operations was responsibility. Marriage had become responsibility. Celeste's business had become another responsibility. Woodworking asked something different of him. Attention, patience, hands, no explanation. Grant remembered how Celeste used to complain about sawdust getting into the garage and the smell of cut lumber drifting toward the house. He had gradually stopped using the space, not because she ordered him to, because small compromises accumulate quietly. Now there was no reason to leave the tools covered. He cleaned the workbench, oiled the tools that needed it, checked blades, sorted clamps. Then he started small. A bookshelf, 4 shelves, clean lines. No decoration for decoration's sake. The work felt familiar. Measure, cut, check, adjust, do it right. One morning, Grant stood in the garage with quiet music playing from a small speaker. The air smelled like cut wood and motor oil. He fitted one shelf into its joint, checked the angle, adjusted it by a fraction. His phone lit up on the workbench. Unknown number. Grant glanced at it. He let it ring. He picked up his tool and kept building. What happened to Grant did not teach him that generosity was foolish. It did not teach him to become suspicious of everyone he loved. For years, he gave because giving was part of his character. He worked overtime because he believed the future he and Celeste talked about belonged to both of them. He helped fund her dream because he wanted to see her succeed. Those choices were sincere. The fact that someone misused his trust did not make the trust itself shameful. But Grant learned that love and self-respect have to live in the same house. Supporting someone does not mean surrendering every boundary. Being patient does not mean staying silent forever. And being a good man does not require allowing someone else to quietly build a future at your expense while pretending you are building it together. There is strength in kindness. There is also strength in paying attention. Grant could have confronted Celeste in the hospital hallway. He could have walked into the room with the flowers still in his hand and demanded answers. Instead, he chose clarity. He documented what he could verify. He asked for professional guidance. He separated facts from assumptions. He allowed the truth to become complete before he acted. That patience protected him. It also kept anger from becoming the center of the story. Celeste made choices. Preston made choices. Marissa made choices about what she knew and what she kept quiet. Those choices had consequences. Grant did not have to invent consequences for them. He only had to stop protecting them from the results of what they had already done. That is an important difference. Accountability is not the same as revenge. Sometimes accountability is simply refusing to sign the loan. Sometimes it is preserving the records. Sometimes it is telling the truth in a room where a false story is about to become accepted as fact. Sometimes it is walking away from a plan that no longer belongs to you. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation either. Grant did not need to hate Celeste in order to leave her. He did not need to wish Preston harm in order to refuse contact. He did not need to spend the rest of his life proving that they were wrong. At some point, moving forward became more valuable than winning. That was why the woodworking mattered, not because a bookshelf could erase betrayal, because it reminded Grant that his hands still knew how to build something for no reason other than the fact that he wanted it to exist. There was no hidden strategy, no audience, no credit score involved. Just wood, tools, measurements, patience, and a man building something that belonged completely to him. Real strength is often quieter than people expect. It can look like working overtime for someone you love. It can look like sitting in a hospital hallway without making a scene. It can look like reading bank statements late at night. It can look like asking an attorney for help before emotion creates a mistake. It can look like telling a family the truth without asking them to stop loving one of their own. And sometimes it looks like letting an unknown phone number ring while you keep working on the life in front of you. Grant kept building, not because nothing had happened, because something had happened. And he refused to let it become the only thing that defined what came next. That may have been the deepest lesson of all. A painful experience can become part of a life without becoming the whole life. Grant did not need to deny what Celeste did in order to move forward. He did not need to pretend the marriage had been meaningless because it had not felt meaningless while he was living it. He had loved sincerely. He had supported sincerely. He had worked sincerely. Those truths still belonged to him. What changed was his willingness to give trust without limits. In the future, Grant understood that kindness could still be generous without being blind. Love could still be patient without requiring silence. Support could still be wholehearted without turning another person's dream into an obligation that erased his own judgment. There was also a lesson in responsibility. Celeste wanted independence, and there was nothing wrong with wanting a life that felt more fully her own. The harm came from the way she chose to pursue it. Instead of speaking honestly, she built financial separation in secret, relied on Grant's credit, and prepared a story that would make her exit easier. Preston wanted Celeste, but he chose to participate in a relationship that depended on another man's ignorance. Marissa knew enough to understand that Grant was being kept outside the truth, yet she remained part of the silence. Each person made choices, and choices create consequences long before a courtroom, a family meeting, or a failed business relationship makes those consequences visible. Grant's path was different because once he understood what was happening, He tried to make his next decisions carefully. That did not make him perfect. It made him responsible for the part of the story that still belonged to him. Sometimes a second chance is not a restored marriage or a dramatic new romance. Sometimes it is much quieter. A clean workbench, a room where you can think clearly, a morning when your phone rings and you realize you are no longer required to answer every call from the past, a piece of wood measured carefully before the cut, a life rebuilt without needing anyone else to understand why it matters. That was the future Grant chose. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I have 2 more stories waiting for you, and I think you'll really enjoy them.